Hi there. This is Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories. I have three great stories today, and most people have probably not heard these stories. I certainly hope you enjoy them as much as I have. They have a powerful spirit about them. I want to give a shout out to my friend Jason Roberts. He just gave me this great haircut. He's in Orem. If you need someone great to do your hair, men or women, he is an artist. So thank you, Jason, for this great haircut this morning. President Nelson recently said, "In coming days, it will not be possible to survive without the guiding, directing, comforting, and constant influence of the Holy Ghost." We live in trying times. There are other people that have had to go through some amazingly hard experiences, and the stories I have today are about people that listened to the Spirit of the Lord and followed the feeling in their heart and were guided and directed and became tools in the Lord's hands. In the 1930s, Europe was still reeling from the effects of the Great Depression. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had been tolerated in Germany, largely because of situations that many people don't know about. A lot of smaller church organizations were being banned in Germany. However, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints found favor with the Nazis for a couple of reasons. In the 1936 Olympics, the Germans wanted to make a great showing, so they convinced a group of Mormon elders to coach the Olympic basketball team for the 1936 Olympics. And also, the Nazis had this Aryan mentality of a superior race. Genealogy was very necessary, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was the leader in the world, and still is, in genealogical research. And so because of that, the church was tolerated. And there was a man named President Zimmer who was in charge of all German-speaking missionaries throughout Europe, and we will speak of him at the end of the discussion. But the first story takes place in the fall of 1937. Hitler announced that he was going to expand his domain into Austria and Czechoslovakia. The following spring in 1938, the church began to remove and withdraw the missionaries from those areas. Joseph Fielding Smith was touring those European missions. On the morning of Friday, August 25th, 1939, he and President Wood received an urgent telegram telling them to immediately get all the missionaries out of Germany and Czechoslovakia. President Wood sent his family and they left the country, but he returned to Frankfurt, to the mission home, and he sent out an urgent telegram to all the missionaries throughout the mission. One of the missionaries that received this telegram was a great big Idaho farm boy that had played football. His name was Elder Norman George Siebold. And he received the telegram, and he made sure that all the missionaries in his zone were transferred out and had gotten out of the country. And then instead of leaving himself, he had a feeling that he should go further into Germany. So he made his way to the mission home in Frankfurt. And there he found President Wood, just worried sick. They had all these missionaries scattered between there and the Netherlands. They didn't even know where they were because communications were down. He'd sent out the telegram, but he didn't feel like most of the missionaries had gotten it. And at this point, I kind of feel like I should do a little dun, 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 because here comes this Idaho farm boy, and here's this mission president. What he says to him is just amazing. He said, "Elder, we have 31 missionaries lost between here and the Dutch border. It will be your mission to find them and see that they get out. Follow your impressions entirely. We have no idea what town these elders will be in." And so this Idaho kid leaves. I'm going to read quite a bit here. This is just too good to paraphrase. Late that night, Norman Siebold left Frankfurt on a crowded train, heading north along the Rhine River. He had tickets to Denmark and money for missionaries he came across, if he only knew where to find them. And he had to hurry. The German government had just announced that the military needed the railways to transport soldiers, so seats would soon be scarce for civilians traveling. When the train stopped in the city of Cologne, Norman felt he should exit. He elbowed his way through the passengers into a swarming station. There were hundreds and hundreds of people. So he climbed onto a baggage cart to see above the crowd, but he did not recognize any missionaries. Then he remembered the missionary whistle, the tune, "Do What Is Right." Norman had little talent for music, but he pursed his lips and whistled the first few notes as best he could. People immediately took notice. I don't know if that's because how bad he whistled or what, but they immediately took notice, and soon Norman saw a missionary and a local German saint coming towards him. He continued to whistle, and more elders and an older missionary couple found him as well. He sent the missionaries to safety and then boarded the train to another city. A few hours later, in the city of Emmerich, Norman found more missionaries. As he gave them money from the mission president, he attracted the attention of a police officer who seemed to think the missionaries were trying to smuggle cash out of Germany. At the time, it was illegal to take German money out of Germany. The officer demanded that they turn over their money and tell him what they're doing. When Norman refused to cooperate, the officer grabbed him and threatened to take him into the city to the authorities. And Norman, this Idaho farm boy, would listen to the police, but he did not want to go to the officer into the city. He said, "You'd better unhand me, or there's going to be a fight." By then, a crowd had formed, and the officer took a glance at the people nervously and let go of Norman and took him to a military official at the train station to explain who he was and what he was doing. The official listened to Norman's story, saw no reason to detain him, and even wrote a letter of explanation for him to give to anyone else who might stop him during his travels. Norman continued on, stopping to look for the missionaries wherever the Spirit directed him. At one remote town, hardly anyone was standing at the railway platform, and it seemed silly to look for missionaries there, but Norman felt he needed to get off the train and go into town. He walked into town. He soon came to a small restaurant and found two elders drinking one glass of apple juice, which they had purchased with their last coins. After days of searching, Norman had located the missionaries. They were able to get to Denmark. He and his companions had to catch trains, commandeered for troops, bluffing conductors and avoiding policemen all the way. When Norman arrived in Copenhagen one day after the invasion of Poland, every North American missionary in Germany was safe. I love that story. Meanwhile, in Czechoslovakia, there's a bunch of missionaries. This is what took place during the same time. While the West German missionaries struggled to reach Denmark, quite a different drama unfolded in Czechoslovakia. On the 11th of July, 4 missionaries were arrested by the Gestapo and thrown into Panrak prison, where political prisoners were held. For 6 weeks, the mission president, Wallace Toronto, worked persistently for their release. He did not succeed until the 23rd of August. Most of the missionaries and Sister Toronto and their family were able to get out of the country and with their possessions and their passports, including President Joseph Fielding Smith, which had come into that mission. And Sister Toronto was worried sick because her husband had stayed in Czechoslovakia and wouldn't come out until he had all his missionaries. And she was really worried. And President Joseph Fielding Smith put his arm around her shoulder and said, "Sister, your husband and the missionaries will be out of Czechoslovakia before the war starts." Meanwhile, President Toronto got all the missionaries out, and they were concluding their business. They were trying to get their passports back, and one of the missionaries was rearrested and thrown into the same prison. And quick and inspired action from the part of President Toronto enabled him to show the German authorities that it was a case of mistaken identity, and the elder was promptly released. That night, the group boarded a special train sent to evacuate the British delegation. It was the last train to leave Czechoslovakia. They passed through Berlin early the next day, and that afternoon boarded the last ferry to cross from Germany to Denmark. Germany invaded Poland that same day. Elder Joseph Fielding Smith's prophetic promise to Sister Toronto was realized. And that's just a great story. I hope you enjoyed that one. During World War II, the United States government drafted photographers and embedded them with troops throughout the different theaters. One of these was Donald. He was an embedded photographer with the Signal Corps. He served in the European theater. He was at the Battle of the Bulge. And then he was transferred to the USS Tennessee, part of the Pacific Theater. The story that I'm going to tell you is quite an amazing story. He was asked, what was the most amazing thing you saw in all those years with the military in World War II? And this is the story he tells. One of the first steps of U.S. island hopping in the Pacific, and the first time the United States penetrated the outer ring of the Japanese sphere, was at Kwajalein. It's considered the last big gun battle. And let me read to you from this great little book. Some folks say that the day of miracles is past. Some people say that such things as this just don't happen. Yet here's a story which will leave you breathless and wondering, for it concerns two inconspicuous boys of the United States Marine Corps. In the pre-dawn hours, the USS Tennessee began to hammer the island of Kwajalein. They had 14-inch guns with armor-piercing rounds. And when they began to finish their bombardment, the U.S. Air Force took over. And they strafed, and they had dive bombers and B-24s, and they just bombed this island into submission. One GI said the entire island looked as if it had been picked up to 20,000 feet and then dropped. And I have this picture that shows that devastation. This is a story that Donald shares. When the attack started, the smaller boats containing the men which must wade through the final stretch of water and brave the withering fire of the Japanese machine guns began. A star fire lit the sky, and the smaller boats began pouring out the men who were destined to take the island. Slowly towards shore, the men of the United States Marines edged closer and closer. In a moment, they would be sighted by the Japanese. The bullets would begin spattering around them from pillboxes skillfully hidden on the beach. But on they came. And soon the battle was joined by the men whose glory is destined to be written in the annals of history. The spatter of machine guns soon laid a death pattern on the men wading toward shore. Here and there they went down, some wounded, some dead, and it is about 2 of these wounded that I speak at the moment. The battle went on, and the men of the Marine Corps, despite the wounds and the death of their comrades, went in. Being a war correspondent, my boat was going in behind the first line of men, and we came upon these 2 wounded Marines in the water. One, from the stain of red around him, we could tell was badly wounded. The other, wounded too, was holding the other boy's head above water with his one good arm. We picked them up amidst a hail of shots from shore, and then pulled back towards safer retreat to render first aid. The one boy seemed too far gone to need much help, but the other boy refused aid until his wounded buddy was attended. But our help seemed insufficient, as we soon realized when we announced our decision to his comrade. Then it happened. The young man, bronzed by the tropical sun, clean as a shark's tooth in the South Seas, slowly got to his knees. His one arm was nearly gone. He lifted the head of his unconscious buddy into his lap, placed his good hand on the other's pale brow, and uttered words, what to us seemed to be incredible words, words which to this moment are emblazoned in unforgettable letters across the doorway of my memory. In the name of Jesus Christ, and by virtue of the holy priesthood which I hold, I command you to remain alive until the necessary help can be obtained to secure the preservation of your life. Today, the three of us are here in Honolulu, and he is still alive. In fact, we walked down the beach together today as we convalesce. He is the wonder of the medical unit, for they say he should be dead. Why he isn't, they don't know. But we do, for we were there on the shores of Kwajalein. I love that story. Well, my concluding story takes place, I mentioned President Zimmer. He had spent 3 decades working with German saints throughout Europe, and during World War II, he was tasked with trying to keep these disabled branches of the church, which had lost all their Melchizedek priesthood, and all the men and boys over 12 and under 80 were all gone unless they were incapacitated. And at the end of the war, after VE Day, President Zimmer had strong desires to visit war-torn Germany and administer to the spiritual and physical needs of the saints there. For 3 decades, he had traveled extensively in the German-speaking part of Europe in church assignments. He had repeatedly made application to the officials of the U.S. Army to enter Germany and Austria with no success. It seemed impossible for any citizen to enter into occupied Germany. President Zimmer, nevertheless, felt very strongly that he was needed there. He and his family made it a matter of prayer and fasted for several days. Once again, the Lord intervened, and Max Zimmer was granted permission to enter Germany. This was nothing short of a miracle, for at the time, in the fall of 1945, the United States Army had issued only 3 military permits to civilians to enter Germany. With this problem solved, there remained still an almost insurmountable obstacle of how to get into Germany. There were no trains connecting Germany to Switzerland at the time, and there was no gasoline available for private cars. President Zimmer was determined, even if he had to go on foot. Again, he brought the matter before the Lord and started to make the necessary preparations for leaving. 2 days after having been granted permission to visit Germany, he received a phone call. It was from a Latter-day Saint serviceman. He was at the border. He said he had come in his military jeep to pick up President Zimmer and take him into Germany, where the saints had called a conference for the next 2 days at which he was to preside. There was no way in the world that these saints could have known that President Zimmer had received or even applied for a permit. There was no telephone, telegram, or mail service between Germany and other European countries at the time. This knowledge could only have come directly as revelation from God. These 3 stories really demonstrate just everyday people listening to the Spirit of the Lord. Some people don't believe that this takes place, but I believe that the greatest communicating system ever conceived is right here. I can communicate, I can transmit, I can receive the word of the Lord in my heart and in my mind. I promise you, the Lord knows you, and he loves you. If you have any doubt of that, just think about it. Ask yourself, is there a God? How could he know about me? And then kneel down and ask him, God, do you love me? And I guarantee you that if you'll do that sincerely and really think about it, you will feel the Lord's love pour into your heart and your mind. You too can know that God knows you and he loves you, and he will guide you and he will guide me, no matter what circumstances we may be in. This has been Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories. Please subscribe. Here's some other stories that you might be interested in. Or you can go to the channel and there's a whole stream of Brother Merrill's Inspirational Stories. Thanks for watching.